I'm from the southern United States. We have a phenomenon there that may not be restricted to the southern United States, but that's really the only part of the world that I can say with certainty I've spent more than half a century in and know a little bit about. Way more than half a century, but we don't need to talk about that. And that's yard sales. Early spring through the summer into early autumn, you'll see little cardboard hand painted signs stuck up on sticks with little ribbons on them with a sign yard sale Friday and Saturday and an arrow pointing the way. And if you follow that little paper trail, you'll find a family has thrown things out onto their front yard. We don't have lawns in the social class that I maneuver in. We have yards, front yards and backyards, and sometimes side yards, but I digress. They will have thrown out on their front yard all of the abandoned, broken, dusty, old, out of date, out of print, or just plain don't want it anymore stuff from their house and often from all of their relatives' houses. And you'll see signs saying 10 family yard sale. And you think, gee, there must be a lot of good stuff there. And then you wait until late spring, early summer, and you can go to the 100-mile yard sale that's all along a highway starting in Alabama, going through Tennessee, and ending up, I think, in Kentucky, maybe West Virginia. I don't know because I planned a couple times to go on the 100-mile yard sale, and I've never made it for the last 95 miles because after a while you just get tired of broken tricycles and old bikes that are rusted out, maybe with the spokes missing, and people's old fishing boats that the transoms cracked on, and trailers with no tires or tires with no rims. I do come from the southern United States, but once again, I digress. What this did for me, this poem that I ran across, it ended up with myself, me, I, lost in reminiscing about one of my family jewels. No, no, not those family jewels. It'll become clear. So let me start with a poem I ran across that started this random stream of semi consciousness for me, and it's entitled Rummage Sale, not Yard Sale. It's entitled Rummage Sale by Jennifer Meyer. Forgive me, Aunt Phyllis, for rejecting the cut glass dishes, the odd set you gathered piece by piece from 13 boxes of Lux laundry soap. Pardon me, egg beater, for preferring the whisk. And you, small ship in a bottle for the diminutive size of your ocean, please don't tell my mother, hideous lamp, that the light you provided was never enough. Domestic deities, do not be angry that my counters are not white with flour. No one is sorrier than I, iron skillet, for the heavy longing for lightness directing my mortal hand, and my apologies to you above all, forsaken dresses. Sway from a rod between ladders behind me, clicking your plastic tongues at the girl you once made beautiful. And the woman with a hard heart and softening body who stands in the driveway making change. Brings back memories of thousands of mornings. None of them stand out, except the people are seldom young. So I'll move on to the second one I ran across, and it's called Memory Noir by Kurt Philip Boehm. Cigarette smoke and cheap perfume linger in a dance of remembrance. An unmarried aunt who clerked in a store, her rummage sale pearls yellow with age, wrapped around my memories and my fascinations. I was 11 years old when she died, and I heard my parents say, Floss was never really happy. But to me, she always smiled and took a nickel from her shiny black purse when it was time for us to leave, putting the coin in my hand and a big red lipstick kiss on my cheek. Looking back, I think it was my parents who were unhappy with who she was. There were whispers of past husbands and maybe a child, but no one ever talked about it out loud. In a black and white 1950s world, Aunt Florence was bigger than their disappointments. Living in the shadows of the post-war mid-century, a loser could slip into one and hang on. She's outlived almost everything I was encouraged to forget, and her life has become rich in my memory, growing richer with time. It was the red lipstick kiss that sent me back to my Aunt Jewel. She was the family jewel. I wrote this essay almost 20 years ago because I ran into a woman, and then, like now, my brain flashed back to Jewel. So I'm going to read in most of it for you today. I saw my Aunt Jewel today. At least she could have been Jewel, but my dear aunt's long since passed. Every family has a Jewel, I think, and ours was a real thing. My first memory of her was her sitting on my uncle's bed, brick red hair and blood red lipstick. She had a cigarette holder that was longer than the cigarette it held and a can of beer in her other hand. Now, I'd never seen a cigarette holder except on TV, and I didn't know any women who smoked. After all, this was the 1950s. Add the fact that I had never seen a can of beer before. I was in a dry county, and it was all in all a very memorable sight. Her voice was as loud and raspy as you would expect from beer and cigarettes, and I learned over time I was at that moment in the presence of the family's blackest black sheep. That made her my favorite. She never lost that distinction. Jewel had actually had the same teacher in the 8th grade that I had in the 7th grade, some 40-odd years later, Mrs. Allred. Now, Mrs. Allred was an institution in Collins, Mississippi, having taught both of my parents a decade or so after Jewel and a couple of decades before me. She was a hard taskmaster. She never showed us any sense of humor. But I maintain she was the single person responsible for teaching me more grammar than any other. She drilled it in, plugged the hole, dared you to forget. I was afraid of her, and I can still diagram sentences and discuss gerunds, largely because of her. But she and Aunt Jewel didn't have that same relationship. See, Ms. Allred had this habit of demanding attention from students, and when she thought she wasn't getting it, she'd throw things at the offenders. Usually it would be a piece of chalk or maybe an eraser, but with Jewel it turned out to be a shoe. Apparently she ran out of chalk, pulled off a shoe and heaved it. Jewel's response, though, wasn't to pay attention or even to throw the shoe back. She got up, went to the back of the room, jumped out the window, and thus ended her education in the 8th grade. Yep. Black sheep in the making. I don't know a lot about her early life, but a few good stories leaked out from time to time. I think the best was a framed certificate that I saw on her wall the one and only time I visited her in Texas. Apparently, there was a time when unescorted women in Mexico were believed to be women of the street looking to ply their trade. They were routinely rounded up, hauled to the Locan Huskow, and charged with public prostitution. Now, let's set the record straight. Jewel was not that kind of woman, but she and a couple of her friends cooked up a scheme which resulted in their being in a restaurant in Mexican border town, sans male accompaniment. Sure enough, they got rousted, hauled away, and locked up. Now, Archie and his friends waited a while to go and find them. How Archie put up with her, I'll never know. The man's wearing saint robes somewhere now. See, prostitution was legal, but it was controlled. The fine for practicing without a license was more than the license cost, which is what Jewel and her friends had counted on. You can figure out the rest. For the rest of her life, she had a license to practice her art in Mexico. Go figure. I stayed long enough with her one week to wreck her golf cart. She made me promise Archie never knew that too many of us were riding way too fast on that golf cart. And I learned her daily routines. Now, she wasn't a coffee drinker, but she'd pop a top on a diet cream soda at the crack of dawn, and she sipped those things all morning long. She left a trail of cream soda cans behind her, but at the stroke of noon, everything changed. Now, she had a big wall clock, chimed every hour, right on the hour, and when 12 o'clock came, it never got past a third chime before I heard the sound that Hoyt Axton made famous for Busch beer. I can approximate the sound. Ka-ch! Jewel popped the top on her first Pearl beer of the day. From there on, cream soda was just a memory, and the Pearl cans took their place. That's the Jewel I knew. That's the Jewel I loved. I saw her today. But she was 50 years too young. Her hair wasn't near red enough, and she'd lost a cigarette holder. Maybe it wasn't her, but the woman I saw sure triggered a lot of memories in me, and just for a little while. Jewel was right back with us, smoking, drinking, cussing, and having a heck of a lot of fun. It'd been a while since I thought of her, and I realized I still miss her. Everyone should have an Aunt Jewel.